Well, the latest RedBridge poll finds that Labor's primary vote among people with TAFE or vocational training qualifications, so we're really talking about tradies, is now at only 30%, while the Coalition's primary vote for that same demographic is 39%. Here's Deputy Opposition Leader Susan Lay's reaction on Sky News this morning.
I'm not surprised that tradies and people who work incredibly hard in regional cities like Albury, where I live, or in the western suburbs of Sydney, or indeed in the teal seats, are a bit annoyed with this government. I mean, this is the face of the modern Labor Party. People who've got university educations, good luck to them. People who've worked in staffing, who've worked in fields that are not about a real hard day's work in the hot sun.
So, Joe, Labor are meant to be the Workers' Party. Why are the workers abandoning the Workers' Party?
Believe it or not, I wrote about this 18 months ago before the last election. I've been screaming it from the rooftops. Every single lefty who supported the Teals, including Get Up, including all their apparatchiks, all the apparatus they threw around it. It's a very upper middle class socialist word, apparati. There you go, kids.
Pass the sausage at the barbecue, mate.
Has basically signed Labor's death warrant. Ironically, RedBridge was actually one of the pollsters that did work with the Teals, and now they're saying that that's the whole problem. But again, a couple of things. One is they took these big, rich, blue ribbon Liberal seats off the Liberals, and the Liberals cannot get them back. Therefore, they have to seek their electoral fortunes elsewhere, and that means, like the Village people saying, they will go west and they will try to target suburban seats that more often than not used to swing Labor's way, and they have no choice but to do that. They are forcing them to do that. So there's that. The second thing is, of course, it ensured that Peter Dutton was the leader of the Coalition and not Josh Frydenberg, and this not only ensured the destruction of the Voice, well done again, lefties, you're really hitting all your KPIs this year, but also meant that Dutton would be campaigning on those kind of conservative social values that he instinctively has, that appeal to blue-collar workers, appeal often to migrants who are more often than not make up the bulk of blue-collar workers and who we saw voted against the Voice in absolute droves, while again not having to talk out of the other side of his mouth on things like climate change or LGBTIQ or trans issues, those sorts of values votes that rich progressives really, really love, but really just piss off ordinary working people. And we are seeing the sum of all fears right now, and it is an existential crisis.
So do you agree with that analysis, Danica?
Well, I just think that Labor should be extremely worried by this, because what it suggests is that they're losing their normal voter base. They have completely lost touch with the average Australian. And when you think those who are particularly impacted by the cost of living crisis, they are your blue-collar workers. And these blue-collar workers have always voted Labor. Their families, their fathers, they've always voted Labor. I think it just goes to show that that the Labor Party no longer represent the views and aspirations of Australians, and they should be very worried about it. In the end, as we've been saying tonight, they went ahead and spent $450 million on the Voice to Parliament campaign instead of actually doing what these people genuinely cared about, and that was some money to help them out.
Paul, we've got, a housing crisis. The Prime Minister's got access to 5 residential properties. We've got, this push for renewables. Chris Bowen's driving around in a taxpayer-funded Tesla. Most of us can't afford to go overseas, but we've got Richard Marles spending $3.6 million. That's on domestic private jets, let alone anything else overseas. Is that part of the problem here? People are sensing you're meant to stand for the workers, and yet you're completely living outside of a worker's experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the problem as well is that when you're a small target opposition and then you start being a big strutting government, that it's a significant difference about who people thought they were hiring to do the job.
Yeah.
Now, I think in terms of the fundamentals, it's important to note in that poll, still, it came down to 52-48 Labor on two-party preferred, which does show that, I mean, the journey for the Libs is Mount Everest-like, right? Which is because of the Teals, because they're only in the 50s, they've got to win an awful lot to get up anywhere close. The likelihood of the Teals falling over at the next election, my sense is that once Australians get a sense of an independent, they generally re-elect them. There's not a lot of one-term independence. So think about people like, in this parliament, Sharkey, Wilkie, Katter, as perfect examples before we get to anything else. So if you're betting, more likely than not that the teals stick around. There might be one or two on the fringes, but essentially that is going to stop the capacity of the Liberal Party to get to the 76 outright. Whether they end up in a sort of close and then we're off to a bidding war, because I think it is a minority parliament at the next election. But one of the biggest problems with the government is that they have gone from the people who were in sync with what the country's concerns were, and in the space of 18 months, look like people who don't get it anymore.
Yeah.
It's a very fast change. And look, every first-term government, a little bit of wobble, all the rest of it, right? But the challenge for the Liberal Party is, yes, to bash away, right? They've got to bash away. But we all knew that when Tony Abbott was bashing away, when you stop the boats was front and centre, absolute, vote for him on day one, that's what's going to happen. At some point, there has to be from the Libs, and I think nuclear power is where they're starting, but they need something on cost of living. They need something pretty big and bold. And again, please don't, start to tweet that I don't know what I'm talking about, because sometimes I agree. But still, which is, something as bold as, look at the current, how the government funds itself. It funds itself through income tax, by a huge margin over company tax, over a huge margin over the GST. Could you dramatically drop income tax in every direction but up the GST and double welfare payments at the same time so people are able to, and therefore the money moving around does replace that revenue? Maybe, I don't know. But Australians, I think, are up for big changes.
Yes.
And one of the reasons why the voice failed, apart from anything else, was nothing was being traded. No, there was no suggestion that you have this, but we'll take these four things away. So it's up to the Libs to get themselves to a position. And the reality is that they'd be wanting to do this going into a second election, not a first election. But part of the pump on them next year is, hey, what's your idea? Best case scenario, the government takes it and you start to look even more credible after the national security stuff, where Labor, even if it turns out to be a success, which it won't, still at its heart is seen as adopting the coalition.
So Evelyn, back to that poll, 30% of tradies voting for Labor, the rest saying, no, you don't represent us. Is that surprising to you?
No, I think you have to be a certain type of person to vote for modern Labor.
Yes.
And I can't see your everyday bricklayer, your everyday carpenter, plumber, tradie bloke, Aussie bloke. I can't see them aligning with wokeism, which has now infiltrated the entire Labor. I think they've drifted so far from what they were that the modern Labor is unrecognisable to the average Aussie bloke. And thank goodness for that. But, I think that this is a really big learning moment for the Liberal Party, because they're essentially doing what Labor are doing in that they're alienating their voter base. So I really hope the Liberal Party can at least look at what's happening unfold, look at it playing out and go, you know what, we're not going to make that mistake. Because if they can capture the voters of the Aussie working bloke, that is a force to be reckoned with. When strong, hard working men get together, that's when big things happen. So Liberal would do very well to try and capture the votes that Labor are losing.